As Donald Trump's war of choice with Iran continues to drag on with no clear off-ramp, a massive cheerleading campaign is underway over at Fox News to justify or spin to their loyal MAGA audience why Trump betrayed a core campaign promise of no new wars. Here was Jesse Waters just yesterday.
And Jessica asked a question that a 5-year-old would ask. When is this thing going to be over?
Stop it.
Okay, that's not a serious contribution to the discussion about a war, Jessica, okay?
Oh.
We knew what was the objective, and we're going about it methodically. If you don't know what the goal is, you aren't listening. Let me explain it to you this way.
It started out with regime change and ending the nuclear program.
There was never regime change.
Yes, it was. He said today we already did a regime change because you got Ayatollah Jr.
Stop You're hyperventilating. Relax. Let me explain the war to you.
The misdirect is fine for our enemies. It's not okay for the American people. And we deserve a timeline, especially when people are worried about...
I don't think you want to put a timeline on something like this. It'll be over when he says it's over. And the objectives have almost been accomplished.
Miss Lindsey Graham,
okay. Is this a 20-year war? Is this a 20-year war? It's 3 weeks, everybody. Take a break. Let the man cook.
I want to bring in my colleague, Catherine Rampell. She's co-host of The Weekend Prime Time right here on MS Now, and economics editor for The Bulwark. Tom Nichols is still with us. Catherine, let him cook. No need for a timeline. It's over when he says it's over. I don't even know how reassuring that is to his own base, Catherine.
I can't imagine it is. These are the words spoken by someone who apparently either has never experienced sacrifice or is indifferent to the sacrifice of others. Donald Trump is asking this country to risk and, in many cases, lose American blood and treasure. And he cannot explicitly explain what the objectives are, let alone how we will judge when they are met. And so, of course, you end up seeing his fellow, allied propagandists twisting themselves into knots, trying to justify and justify whatever this war is, which sometimes it's not even a war, and dismiss the very valid concerns of the American people who worry about not only our reputation abroad, the destruction and humanitarian carnage we are wreaking abroad, but the very real costs that are being inflicted here at home as well, economically, among other things. These are valid questions for the American people to ask. And you just see Fox News circling the wagons, trying to deflect them so that the president doesn't have to answer.
Tom Nichols, these are valid questions for the American people to ask. They are valid questions for a fair and free press to ask. In fact, it is never more important that we ask these questions than in moments of international conflict. Meanwhile, you have former Trump advisor Keith Kellogg workshopping, pushing a talking point that Fox has been using to, I guess you could say, prepare their audience for the possibility of boots on the ground. Take a listen.
Look, I'm a big believer in putting boots on the ground, not necessarily into Iran, but taking Kharg Island and also taking the Strait of Hormuz. Look, we kind of need to do it the way the Romans used to do it.
Tom, I just want you to fact check me here. Boots on the ground in Kharg Island, that is still boots on the ground, yes?
And it's boots on the ground in Iran. I live in Rhode Island. I would really object if someone said, well, we're just taking Newport. We're not actually invading America. It is a psychological preparation for whatever it is Trump wants to do, because the guiding philosophy of everyone who works for Trump, and that includes people like Jesse Waters, who works for Fox, and, the other propagandists, Trump is never wrong. The dear leader can never be wrong, no matter what he does, no matter how many times he flip-flops or does a 180 or screws up. Whatever it was a brilliant masterstroke. I know we've become exhausted by asking this question, but one more time, imagine if Joe Biden had gone on television and sort of stared off into space and said, well, I had a present and it was beautiful and we won. And there's some people... Jesse Waters would be jumping up and down on his desk in prime time, screaming about the 25th Amendment and leading us into a forever war. This is purely servicing a cult of personality. It's almost beneath taking seriously. It's beneath serious comment, but it's going to happen. And unfortunately, that's the message that's going to be sent out to millions of Americans. I'm not sure it will work with all of them. I think at this point, no matter how much they try to put a gloss on this, this was all supposed to be over. And one more time, the goal was regime change. That Jessica Tarlov's absolutely right. And that's why you see these sheepish looks around the table and why Waters goes into his sort of full, arrogant goofball mode, about kind of shushing the hyperventilating female at the table. But she's right. This war did begin about regime change, and now it's a hot mess. And, Fox will never admit that because it's not these are not actual people who are interested in sending any kind of dose of reality to their viewers.
Right, Catherine, I agree with Tom's point that the analysis is unserious. I think what is interesting to us is sort of the delta between what is actually happening and what a broad swath of Americans understand to be happening. And while I think they can spin this piece about boots on the ground and they can spin the timeline, what they can't spin is the price that people are feeling every time they go to the pump. I will match that with some of this new polling showing that 45% of Americans are extremely or very concerned about being able to afford gas in the next few months. That's up from 30% in just after Trump won re-election. That's the problem, Catherine, that you both have the stakes of this war as it relates to everything you said, America's role on the world stage, our safety and our security, and then just the very pedestrian reality of needing to fill your tank to get to work and being afraid that you may not be able to do that in the coming weeks.
Absolutely. Americans voted for this president because he said no new wars and lower prices. And of course, he has delivered very much the opposite. And even if the typical American is not paying close attention to what happens beyond our borders and what's happening with these military excursions, to use Trump's apparent malapropism, they do notice what happens when they try to fill up their tank. And they notice that gas has gotten more than $1 per gallon more expensive just over the past month. These are things that the president cannot wish away. They are the worst possible political circumstances going into a midterm. I mean, I remember in 2022 when Joe Biden was looking under every rock trying to find ways to reduce gas prices because for the most part, presidents do not have a lot of control over the price at the pump. It turns out they have the ability to raise them. They just don't have the ability to lower them. So, yeah, I mean, I understand why this administration and, again, their propagandist allies are trying to spin all of this, but they cannot argue with the facts. And the facts are that the affordability problem that drove the last election, that will drive this coming election, is only getting worse precisely because of the actions their president has taken.
Right. And that is where you see, Tom Nichols, some of the fracturing among not just the MAGA base, but the MAGA messengers, right? The fact that a lot of the Broverse, even the Megyn Kellys of the world, Nancy Mace, Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, I mean, they are starting to message around the fact that this is unpopular. And it is almost as though we are seeing the beginning of their internal resistance.
I don't know if it's an internal resistance, but I think that the delta you talked about earlier becomes overwhelming. A lot of these people have just mortgaged their souls, sold their souls for pennies on the dollar to keep trying to explain and spin and rationalize for Donald Trump, like parents trying to explain, their juvenile delinquent child. But the problem starts to come when you yourself start to look crazy by joining the president in his break from reality. I think that's where people say, I even if they want to, and I think some of them would gladly do it, they can't sell it. That at some point, spin, that's a skill. You can spin things. And you can say, well, the president has goals in Iran. Iran's a terrorist state, bad regime, and so on. But then to say, the prices at the pump, the kind of thing Catherine's talking about. You're not seeing what you're seeing. Don't believe your lying eyes. And I think, there are people, especially now that Trump, we're not going to live forever with Donald Trump in the White House. There are people saying, I literally cannot look that crazy to tell people that what's happening in front of them isn't actually happening. And the president's ask of his sycophants, frankly, the ask is getting higher and higher and more expensive every day for them.